be made. We're now connected with psychologist Anastasia Satriyo. Good morning, Anastasia.
Paul and Shafira.
Hi.
How are you today?
Good morning.
We're
Happy New
good.
Year. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yes, and Happy New Year for all of us.
Hopefully. Now,
Yes.
let's first off, my first question is, before we even talk about boarding schools, how do we decide when is the right time to send our kids, if need to boarding school? For example, is there a minimum age, and is there any kind of behavior that they need to exemplify before we can make this decision?
Yes, there is a lot of debate and different research result about this boarding school. But I believe as a parents, we are the one who have the value and our own goal about what is the main point for us to send our children to boarding school. But the red flag is important that not to put the child in the boarding school in order to make the children behave.
Okay.
A lot of story we read about this kind, like they feel that, oh, my child is it's very hard to be tame, and obey. So I send them to the boarding school.
Yeah.
When I learn about the child neuropsychology, it's not really helpful for their brain because in their such young age they need a very conducive environment. They need a stable and safe, emotionally safe environment to help them thriving. So it's important. Before I saw the previous video about the boarding school for the athlete. I think the reason and the goal is quite clear, to prepare them to be an athlete or for the religious reason. But the goal has to be clear. The first and the second is not to put away the child from the house. It's because the parents is already give up to taking care of the child, because the child will feel neglected, and it will create another behavior and emotional problem. And the third one is make sure the facility in the boarding school, because it's not only the boarding school as a big part, but also we have to see the teacher, the school, the facility, and etc. The things that we have to consider, and then later on we will talk about how to prepare the child for the boarding school.
Oh,
I
okay.
completely agree, because you know, kind of moving the problem away doesn't get rid of the problem.
Yeah.
I was telling you before we went on air that I myself, when I was 2, going on to 3 years old, I was still in preschool, going into kindergarten. I left to go to Singapore with my sister, who was 8 years older than me, so she was 10. We stayed at a boarding house, and my parents at that time knew the people we were staying with. They went and screened both schools that we would be attending before actually leaving to go back to Indonesia. And I think the reason for that, their reason behind it is they wanted us to get education at that time in Singapore, which was deemed to be a little bit more advanced. And that was the right reason. And to this day, I don't feel any kind of resentment or anything towards my parents.
Wow.
I understood why they made that decision, but that's not always the case.
It's a good decision that your parents send you, because they know clearly what is their goal.
And they communicated that to me as well.
Exactly. They didn't send you away because you're naughty or hard to think.
But I was naughty, by the way.
All right. So, but Anastasia also mentioned about the facility, not only the building facility, but also what is the boarding school can provide in order to shaping the kids to right with the intention and the goals. Do you have any suggestion? What factors do they have to consider for the parents to see whether or not to send the kids, or what kind of factors that parents should see from the boarding school?
Yes, I think we already agree that the quality of education lies on the teachers' quality and all the adults that support the environment of education. We have to understand as a parents, when we send our children to the boarding school, we rarely have involvement and contribution for the day-to-day life of the children. So we have to reconsidering to ourselves first, not to convincing our child, but to convincing ourselves and our partner. Is it okay if we don't involve in the values development of our children in daily life? Because nowadays we understand about the child neuropsychology, that the brain, the synapse of the brain is built from day-to-day interaction. It's not about the bigger activity or just one-shot activity, but it's a daily maintaining routines. And also, I think it's also time for the boarding schools owner or the management to really learn about the children development in psychology way and the neuropsychology way, because sometimes we still using the discipline method from the past history time, from the Dutch colonialism. It's very different with the discipline that we learn today regarding the development of the child's brain. So I think the main part is to have the firm but love situation, to have good enough boundary, freedom within limits. It's not only restriction 100%, but the child needs the freedom in age appropriate with them. But also they need a structure, predictability, and stability. As well, it's happened in home, because nowadays we understand there is a lot of chaotic home and giving a bad environment for the child to develop their brain. I think wherever the child work, whether in boarding school or at home, they have to know that we need a certain environment. Like when we want to grow the tree, we need a certain condition for the tree to grow in optimum condition, right?
I can agree more. Yeah, you're right. And especially these days, in the recent times, we've learned so much about education and how to nurture a child properly, as opposed to this old school way of thinking. But you know, going to visiting a boarding school, meeting with the staff, checking out the facilities, that will give us a good idea as to what the facilities can provide. Education-wise, you can look at track records of previous students to know how well they can do academically. But how do we measure safety, Anastasia? Like, how do we decide, is this place safe enough for my child? Because some of the reasons these sexual harassment or assault cases are happening is because these children are vulnerable. They're actually without their parents or the protection of their parents, some of them for the very first time ever. So how do we as parents judge whether or not this place will be safe enough for our children?
Yes, it's very horrible to witness this kind of stories these days. But I didn't think it's just new things. It's just things that just coming up to the surface. The things in a psychology perspective, especially in gender perspective, that why the sexual harassment can happen is because there is the imbalance of power. The power relation is not suitable. In fact, we understand when we are a children or we are a student, we have to respect our teacher, our former principal, but we have to do the interview or the study case to the school and the principal. We have to ask what happened if the child makes some mistakes and how they overcome a mistake. Because when we have a children or when we become an educator, we have to expect a fault. We have to expect there is a chaos. We have to expect these children has the growing brain that not mature enough. So they will make a mistake, and how the school overcoming this mistake is the most important things. Because we learn from the past decades that we feel or we thought that we have to be a perfect student, right? But in fact, it's not the thing that we want to have when we learn about this brain development of the children. So we have to ask about how they deal if there is a mistake or there is some violation of the rules, and also how they see themselves as a protector for the children. Because in the places, this is from the research, from the places that they feel that the teachers or the adult is very powerful, the omnipotent adult that cannot be discussed, there is no democration, there is no true way of communication. Most probably they will become the place for this kind of harassment or the violence. It can be a physical harassment, physical assault too. But we have to really careful and understand about this power relation.
And I think it's always important to stress to your children, whether you send them to boarding school or not, that they do have power in their hands. They may be young, but they need to be able to question authority. If they need to, if they have any kind of concerns, they need to be able to understand that they have a voice that they can share.
Of course, they might be vulnerable, but they have to know how to stand up for themselves.
For sure.
Right? And Anastasia, what do you think about this? Teachers are expected to act as surrogate parents for kids in boarding school. Does this mean their biological parents have little to no role in their children's lives anymore, or what do you think?
I think it's put too much pressure for the teacher also to make them as a surrogate parents.
Yeah.
In fact, we can realize during this pandemic to teach the children at home, doing this online school learning, it's very chaotic, and even we only have 2 or 3 kids at home or just one. Imagine if it's a boarding school, one teacher has to be responsible for 20 or 30 kids maybe.
Yes.
So I think it's not suitable. So the teacher also have to understand their role, as well the parents also have to understand the limitation, because the teacher handling a lot of students, a lot of kids. I think it's very good that we have the clear rules and we know what is the toleration, because if it's doing wrong for twice or third time, what will happen? And then most of the time, maybe every 3 days or once every week, the parent should be proactive to connect with the child, because sometimes when the parent didn't understand about the child development emotionally and psychologically, they will feel, I don't think my children want to meet me because they no longer miss me. In fact, it's the defense mechanism of the children, because they will feel that they're so really miss their parents, but
isolated.
their parents is very far away. Then they block up their emotion, like, okay, I don't need my parents.
Right.
In fact, it's not the right thing to do. Actually, it's just the mechanism, the psychological mechanism of the child not to be clingy for their parents.
They don't want to be vulnerable.
They're still very emotionally and psychologically very dependent to the parents. So the parents should do the proactive way to meet, to invite them, or to just send something from the home. It makes them feel very close to the parents.
Yeah, and it starts simply, even if your kids aren't in boarding school. Like my kid just started first grade, and on a daily basis, I'll ask her, no matter what, how was school today? What did you learn? How did you do? What did your teacher say something to you? Because kids will feel, if it's the same thing as yesterday, then I don't need to tell them.
Yeah.
But then where does that end? Because then the next day they'll be like, I don't need to tell because I didn't tell anything yesterday.
Yeah.
But then these little things can creep up, and you don't recognize if there's any underlying problems as well, right?
Right.
So those are when it comes to authority figures or teachers. But what are some of the other problems that can arise from the social environment of being in a boarding school? We do know they have peers, they have seniors, they have kids that are underneath them in age as well. What kind of other problems do we need to be concerned with when it comes to the social environment in boarding schools?
Yes, according to psychology research, the things that we have to concern most also the bullying and the peer impact. It's not necessarily the bullying with the very severe impact, but our friends or who we will be surrounding with impact how we think, our preference about music, food, and how we feel the life. Can you imagine, even if you live with your parents, the impact of the peers is also high in teenagers' life. Can you imagine if there is no parents' involvement in everyday interaction, and it's all about the friends at the boarding school? So we have to really careful, and a lot of discussion, I think, for the kids to know that which kind of value from your peers, from your friends, that is okay to adopt for yourself, but which one of the value that is not suitable for you and for our family, because the most important thing is the family values that was built from the parents, because the child the responsibility of the child is still in the parents, not in the school actually.
Okay. So this is very interesting, because we've been talking from the parent side point of view, and also from the school, from the boarding school itself. What about the children itself, Anastasia? Is there anything that the children should prepare before they enter the boarding school and start the new life in a boarding school? And also for the parents, to avoid being overly concerned in entrusting their kids to boarding schools?
How do we deal with it once our kids are gone?
Yes.
Yeah, I think for the child, it depends on the age when they leave the house and went to boarding school. Like the story of Paul, maybe later on Paul will share your story.
Paul will share it after.
Yeah, and then because when they leave the school for the boarding school during the elementary school, how they thing is very concrete way. So maybe the parents can repeat what they will have experienced in that boarding school and the reason, because the child needs to know the good reason, right? Not
Yeah.
for expel the child, but because we
Yes.
want you to have a better education, because we want you to have better life from us. I think it's a very sincere reason that the child will can cope with it better, rather than just, oh, you are just a naughty kid.
Right.
And then the second one, when the child enter the boarding school during the teenagers time, especially during the transition period between 11 years old to 14 years old, I think a lot of emotional preparation, psychological preparation, like talking with the child, make sure that you can still reach out to the parents every time you need us. And I think it's very different when it's coming from to the boarding school for the high school level or even for the college life, because the maturity of the brain is already different.
Right.
So I think we have to see the developmental appropriate age of the children, and doing the communication, using the appropriate guidance and communicate it in the way the brain can understand.
Yeah, I think if I can share a little bit of my experience when it came to me, my mom did spend, I can't remember because I was so young at the time, around 6 to 8 months there with us to make sure that we were transitioning okay, being in a new country, and started school before she went back. But despite that, despite all the preparations, despite all the communications, I remember, because I don't cry much. I don't cry when I'm happy. I don't cry when I'm sad. But I did cry when my mom left, because that was the first time we were separated. But looking back at it now, it was maybe sad because I didn't understand it fully, but I still fully appreciate everything they did. Now, from the parent side, I don't know how my mom did it. I don't know how she was able
must
to
be very
separate
hard for
herself.
them
Because
as
back
well.
then we didn't have FaceTime, we
Yes.
didn't have email.
Yeah.
Only thing we had was actual phone calls and long-distance phone calls at that time. We're not
very
cheap. That's
expensive,
right.
exactly.
So,
Wow.
yeah, so I praise my mom for being able to put us through that, because we did get a better education. because of it.
Yes, oh my God, it's very beautiful story. Thank you so much, Anastasia,
Thank you, Anastasia,
for your
sharing
insightful.
Thank you so much.
Really do
Thank you.
appreciate this more in-depth look, because this
Yes.
is something that has been on the horizon lately.